All right, good evening. Um, so, we are going to move on. We're still continuing our discussion of apologetics for this Bible class, but we're going to be changing gears a little bit and start working on the second main pillar of apologetics, that being the validity of the Bible. If you recall, we've already discussed the first of the main three pillars, which is the existence of God. Now we're going to begin discussing the validity of the Bible, and in the future we will talk about the divinity of Jesus, and then we'll go into some more we'll wrap up some loose ends. So this is kind of what we've gone through so far. These next parts, I think will go by pretty fast, so it may look like we're only about a third of the way done, but it's around that. It's around that, but a little bit further. So this is kind of the main question you'll run into if you walk people who have no knowledge of God whatsoever. If you walk them through this kind of process and you take them through, okay, here's why you should believe in God. This is all the external evidence, right? They could say, or a very natural thing to say is, okay, but which God, right? And it's kind of natural, especially for people who have no knowledge of God whatsoever. A lot of people claim that their God is the right one. So which God do they believe? So let's look at just a few passages. I believe these are already in here. Yes, they are. Okay, so let's look at a few passages. The Bible, obviously, right, claims to be from God. Did I have the right one for this? Yeah, I guess I did. Psalm 19:6. Oh, yeah, I see now. It's all right. Psalm 19:160. Psalm 119, 160. That says, the entirety of your word is truth, and every one of your righteous judgments endures forever. Right. So there's kind of it's embedded in this verse. That's kind of a praise verse, but embedded in there is, hey, your word, the psalmist here talking to God, your word is truth. And it's implied the words that is being written and has been written, that we have recorded in our Bible, right? Your word is true. And the Bible claims to be God, as we will see in a second. Or the Bible claims to be from God. John 17:17. It says, sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. This is Jesus praying over his disciples. And so he is praying to God and saying, your word is truth. And again, kind of the implicit claim here is that, okay, it's what has been recorded in the Scriptures. But probably no more famous, you know what I'm trying to say, that illustrates this is 2 Timothy 3:16 through 17. It says, all Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, thoroughly equipped for every good work. So this is Paul writing to Timothy saying, hey, all of Scripture is from God, and it's useful, right? So the Bible claims to be from God. And Genesis 1, right? First verse, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The Bible exists as a record of this, and it's upheld, that claim is upheld throughout Revelation 22 and everything in between. Okay, now changing gears a little bit. What do y'all think of this statement? Well, I'll rephrase that question. So this statement is, of course this car is perfect. It says so on the bumper sticker. It says every bad car salesman. Do you believe that car salesman? Just because? Do you believe it? Probably not. In fact, I would be tempted to say he's most likely lying to me. The reason I bring this up is not to say that this is fair or this is right, but this is how people who do not believe in God view Christians who say, well, of course I believe the Bible. It says so. It says I should believe in the Bible. This is a meme I found. I Googled, I believe in God because the Bible tells me so. This is like the first image that comes up when you search that. This is what people outside the church think of Christians who say that. Now, am I saying that that's a good thing or that they understand really what we're saying? No, not really. I think what a lot of people mean when they say that is, I have a lot of faith in the Bible. I have a lot of faith in God. And they express that by saying, well, This is the way it comes across to me. I've never even thought to question the Bible because my faith is so great in it, which is a good thing, and that's something to be celebrated. But we need to be careful when we're talking to people outside the faith, or even if we're training up, right, our children in the faith. This is how non-Christians view us when we say stuff like this. So we need to be careful about what we say, because our impact is great, or has the potential to be great. And the reason they think that this kind of claim is laughable is because of this. We referenced this when we talked about logic, circular reasoning. It's basically where you argue for something, but your reasoning for arguing for that thing assumes the conclusion, and basically it just leads you in this loop where you're not introducing anything new or able to be debated. And so, right, how do I even comment on this closed loop? I can't interject anything. So if I disagree with the conclusion, we can't have a discussion. So when we're discussing the Bible and Christianity with people who don't believe, we need to keep this in mind, that we need to be intellectually fair, but we can still maintain the truth of the Bible while doing so, and we're going to kind of demonstrate that through this class. The Bible is correct. The Bible is true whether or not you believe it, right? It does say it's true, because, right, things that are true generally uphold. Like if I think that I'm true when I tell you something, if you ask me, hey, do you think you're telling the truth? I'm going to say, yeah, of course I do, right? And the same is true for the Bible, but it's true whether or not it says it. And we're just going to kind of go through that. Oh, is there a comment over here? Yeah. Yes. And that leads kind of perfectly, well, not into this next slide, but I'm going to get to there. That is basically what these next few classes are going to be talking about. How do we kind of prove, hey, this is why you should believe the Bible, and how to convince people who don't believe or don't even want to believe. And the reason is because, right, which book do we believe? This is just an example, 2 Timothy 3:16, which we just looked at. This is a verse, if you will, from the Quran. Yunus, I think I'm pronouncing that right, I don't know, 10:37. It reads, "It is not possible for this Quran to have been produced by anyone other than Allah. In fact, it is confirmation of what came before and an explanation of the Scripture. It is, without a doubt, from the Lord of all worlds." The Bible is not the only book that claims to be from God. Lots of them are. This is just an example, but the Book of Mormon, right, is another ready example. Pretty much every religious text that you can find claims to be from God. So we can't just take the claims inside the book, because otherwise we should believe a ton of different books. But there are things outside of the book and inside the book that show us why we should believe the Bible. And so this is kind of what we're going to go through over, these are 3 classes we're going to have. The first one is going to be discussing the reliability of the Bible, talking about its historicity, and rebutting supposed contradictions. Then we're going to be talking about its divinity, all the features that it contains that are beyond human capability, right? Because, like, just one example is fulfilled prophecy. It's not possible for humans to do that without the help of God. And if a book has fulfilled prophecies in them, that's a character that is beyond human capability. It means God had to be involved in this. And then lastly, this is not necessarily to prove that we should trust the Scriptures or trust the Bible, but this discussion of authority will talk about, okay, now kind of how do we interpret what is being said here? Because there are people who claim, yeah, okay, I believe the Bible is historical, I believe God was involved, but they don't believe in inspiration. How does that work? There are those people, and we'll talk a little bit about that tonight, but that discussion will really be hitting that. And so there will be at points during this class, because this is the first of these 3 classes. There will be points here when I don't touch on inspiration, right? Because that comes later. And there may be gaps that are left in this class, which we'll talk about a few of them, and you may have questions about it. But rest assured, they generally will be answered in the next 2 classes. All right, so we're going to be talking about the reliability of the text. So the first part of this is historicity. Basically, that just means, is it historically actual? Did the things described in the text actually happen? Right? This is because a lot of people will say, right, well, this is just a really big, really complex fairy tale. Is that the case? Or is it actually a historical document? we're going to go through. The answer is it's a historical document. But how do we kind of measure this? How do we evaluate it? We measure it through examining the documents themselves. And when I say that, I don't mean the content. I mean I do kind of mean the content. But I mean like the actual things we're using to say, oh, this is the document, right? If we had like the original copy of the Declaration of Independence, that's kind of what we're examining. There have been copies made, but we're kind of examining, okay, we're examining the document itself. Is this official or is this genuine? And then verifying the content therein, which kind of gets into the supposed contradictions. All right. So when we're discussing the historicity of the Bible, the discussion usually goes straight to manuscripts. And that's fine, because this evidence is very compelling. The simple claim is the Bible has more extant, which that just means existing, manuscripts than many other accepted documents. I just have a couple, but you could really go on and on and on and list dozens and even hundreds of historical documents that historians claim to be true or historical, and compare them to the Bible, and you would still see this trend. If you can't read that, because I apologize, the numbers are small, we're going to be measuring the number of manuscripts, and the ones we have are the history of Herodotus, Josephus' Jewish Wars, the history of Tacitus, and the New Testament. So the history of Herodotus has 8 manuscripts. Okay. It's generally considered to be pretty historically accurate. 8 is, hey, that's a lot. Sure. Josephus' Jewish Wars has 9, so slightly better, but not a lot. History of Tacitus, maybe I can say this eventually, has 20, so that's really good, right? More than double the previous one. The New Testament has a little less than 6,000. I don't know if you can see those. They're still there. So, like, there is a surplus. Now, when we say manuscripts, we don't necessarily mean full manuscripts that have the entire Bible. We mean like pieces, fragments. Some of them there are a lot of complete books. There are some that have, like all the Gospels. There are some that have a collection of letters, things like that. The Dead Sea Scrolls has, I believe, most of the Old Testament. But that's true. We're kind of measuring that for all of these, right? There are only like so many fragments that we're working off of, and there are so many more for the New Testament. Yep. If you're trying to change one thing, right, you'd have to go and correct it in definitely. And I don't hit on that point a lot in this class specifically. That comes up later when I talk more about it's called critical theory, which. That discussion, it does fit in here, definitely, like you just highlighted, like, yes, great evidence that the scriptures haven't been corrupted. But it fits in better, I think, with the point I want to make in that class. So I kind of save that a little, but you're absolutely right? It's really hard to corrupt something when you would have to manually go to dozens of manuscripts all around the world and change every single one of them. And we don't see that. So, not only that, right, but the Bible has more manuscripts written closer to the date of the original. So we don't have original manuscripts for any of these other things that we've talked about. We don't have any of the originals. We have very close copies, right? So history of Herodotus was written in 425. Date of earliest manuscript, AD 900. Josephus' Jewish Wars was written in AD 70. Earliest manuscript, AD 400. History of Tacitus, written AD 100, nearest manuscript AD 900. The New Testament, it was written from the period of AD 35, thereabouts, to AD 100. Earliest manuscript AD 125. So about 25 years versus the hundreds here. So not only do we have many more manuscripts that prove for the Bible, but also we have ones a lot earlier. Right? And so for things to be like an argument that's made often, right, a lot of this is just folk tales. It's verbal tradition. It doesn't necessarily reflect what really happened. It's a lot harder to start folk tales while the people you're writing about are still alive. Right? It's a lot easier to make myths about people who died a couple hundred years ago than it is to write about people who are still around. and could tell you whether or not what they said was true or not. And so that's just another reason why we can say, okay, these things that happened that are recorded, probably pretty, we can trust that they're at least closer than what actually happened than all these other documents that scholars accept to be factually accurate. So as far as if we're just measuring the historical nature of this book, it's pretty historically accurate as far as ancient manuscripts and ancient documents go. Okay, and this is just kind of a further point. If you're interested in examining this point further, Brutz Metzger, he has a lot of things written about this. I haven't read everything this guy's written. I've read some of it's good, some of it's not so good. But he goes into how, hey, there's so many manuscripts, you can trust the things that were written. The manuscripts are so similar that you can trust what was written actually happened. And even people who don't believe in God, who still study this stuff, believe that it is historically accurate. This is a book written by Bart Ehrman. It's called Did Jesus Exist? The Historical Argument for Jesus of Nazareth. He is an atheist. He may claim to be an agnostic, but he's an ex-Christian. I'm not entirely sure what his religious background is, but he does not believe in Jesus. He does believe in Jesus, but he does not believe Jesus is God. And he does not believe that, anyway, he supports that all of this is historically accurate. It just has a lot of, he claims, fake Christian stuff thrown in. But he still claims that it's historically accurate. So you don't even have to believe in God to accept, hey, the Bible's historically accurate. So that's a plus. The second point is there's a lot of archaeological corroboration. So there's a lot of just archaeological evidence that says, hey, the stuff that was written about in the Bible, we found that stuff. And generally there's an overall pattern which we will recognize kind of after going through each of these points. There's not a ton. But there's the Tel Dan inscription, which has a little marking right here that tells about the house of David in around the area of Israel, right? So and this, I believe, is talking about the conquests of a king and mentioning Israel. We have the discovery of the Hittite civilization. So Genesis 23, for a little bit of background, I'm not entirely sure if this is factually accurate. I could not find first degree sources for this, but the story goes that I believe it was before, I want to say 1906. There had been no archaeological evidence for the Hittites existing in the world, right? The only mention of them was in the Bible. I could have the dates wrong, but the dates are not really that important. And the story goes that was a point of contention and a point of debate that atheists would say, hey, the Bible just made up a people group. We have no evidence that they existed. The Bible's fake, right? Well, then, lo and behold, we'll just see. Genesis 23, they're mentioned there. Abraham, they're mentioned there. They're also mentioned in 2 Samuel 11. Lo and behold, they were eventually found to exist. Archaeology just hadn't found them yet. And so and like I said, I couldn't find that story that atheists would use this I couldn't find any examples of it firsthand, but still. And then there's the Cyrus cylinder, which tells about basically Ezra and Nehemiah, right? The Persian Empire letting the people of Israel go to rebuild. Again, confirming events found in the Bible. And then for the New Testament, most of the archaeological evidence focuses on Luke's historical precision. So throughout Paul's missionary journeys, Luke is writing about all the things that happened. He uses geographical terms when moving between cities. He uses proper titles that were not common for the general area, but very common for specific cities. He used time-accurate technical language jargon for sailing and things like that. So he's very historically accurate in pretty much every instance you can critique, and the instances in which there's a little bit of discrepancy, we don't have external evidence for. And so, generally speaking, he's very accurate. Did you? Okay. I couldn't find a whole lot corroborating other events in the New Testament, just because most of it takes place in very short geographical locations, or is mostly focused just on teaching, and is not really focused on, events of kingdoms that usually just survive archaeology. But when possible, it is corroborated. And that kind of brings us to the overall theme, right? Which is, whenever possible, archaeology confirms the Bible, it never contradicts it. And on this point, this is a theme for this kind of entire discussion. There may be things that are difficult or only fit together with a specific interpretation, but the fact that there is an interpretation in which everything fits together means that it fits together. It means it's not a contradiction. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. There are a few other examples that are a bit more complex. For instance, the city of Ai is debated. I didn't really go into that just because you could have an entire class on this. People even have whole degrees on this, biblical archaeology. So I'm not going to belabor this point anymore, except that whenever possible, archaeology confirms the Bible. It doesn't contradict it. Are there any questions about this? Anything we've covered so far? Okay. So generally speaking, the Bible is historically accurate, and verifiably so. It also has a lot of internal consistency, which you would expect from a historical document. You wouldn't, whenever you're dealing with a piece of fiction, it's common. You will find contradictions and problems and errors because the author forgot things. But usually when you're dealing with history, if people are recording things as they're happening, things may fit together awkwardly if you're reading it without being there, but they do fit together. And so 40 authors over about 1,500 years wrote a unified narrative of redemption from Genesis to Revelation, and they're consistent with each other. Here is a popular image that shows the cross-references in the Bible. And there are several. There's an interactive map online that you can look up where you can click and see the cross-references, and that's really cool to just play around with. So if you have time and want to, that's cool. This brings us, though, to our next point, because a lot of people who don't believe the Bible will say, no, it's not. There's tons of contradictions. There's contradictions all over the place. What are you talking about? So that brings us to our next point. If we want to say, hey, you should trust the Bible, it is factually accurate, we should expect there to be no contradictions. Well, people claim that there are several. So what do we do with that? Generally speaking, there are four main categories. There's different ones, and you could sort them differently. And I was debating up into, sending this PowerPoint in, how I would organize these. So this is not an exhaustive list or perfect, but generally there's about four types. There's genre confusion. There's differing perspective versus genuine conflict. There are translation or copying variants or errors. And there are numbers and genealogy questions. Okay? So what I kind of want to do is I want to go through an example of each of these and kind of break them down a little bit. Show kind of, okay, here's an answer to this specific one. I can't go through all of them because the supposed number of contradictions that people throw out there, there's hundreds of them, but all of them work out like this. I'll save that story for a little bit. So genre confusion. Let's go to Proverbs 26, 24 through 25. This one's kind of funny when you read it, at least it is for me. Just because, this is probably the best example of 100%, this looks like a contradiction, right? Proverbs 26, 4 through 5. It says, "Do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you also be like him." Verse 5 says, "Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes." So in verse 4, we're told, okay, don't answer a fool. And then in verse 5, we're said, okay, but do answer him. That's a contradiction, right? What do y'all think? No, I see people shaking their head no. All right, someone tell me why. Yeah, but you bring up a good point, right? That's a valid answer. You don't have to have the answer. You just have to have a answer. If you have a answer, it shows it's not a contradiction. It just may be hard to answer, right? It may be difficult, but it's not a contradiction. A contradiction literally means these two things are incompatible with each other. But if you have an answer, it's not a contradiction. You may not have the right answer, but if you can answer it, it's not a contradiction. So this is kind of what I said. It's a collection of general wisdom. Proverbs is a collection of general wisdom, not enumerated law. Proverbs is wisdom literature. It's meant to be general advice. I won't go into that. That's a different conversation. But, right, this is kind of a genre confusion, if you will. Now, what Jonathan said is perfectly valid, right? The words, if they're not, I haven't looked at it, but if the words aren't even the same for fool, it's just straight up not a contradiction. That would be a problem with translation, or a difficulty with translation. But also, right, Proverbs is not written like a law book. Now, if this was found in Deuteronomy, okay, that would be a problem. How do the Israelites follow that law? But this has general advice, right? This is wisdom, and wisdom often is seemingly contradictory depending on the situation. Solomon here writes, he tells you, right, kind of when to do each of these things. He says, I shouldn't have turned away from this, especially if I was going right back to it. He says in verse 4, right, lest you also be like him. But then in verse 5, he says, lest he be wise in his own eyes. Maybe this is telling us, hey, the consequences of what you tell a fool matter. And if the consequences are bad, don't engage with it. But if the consequences are bad not to engage with it, then engage with it, right? This is wisdom literature. It's not law. So that's an answer, but there are several other answers. It's not a contradiction. It just may be difficult to interpret. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. There's several examples of that whenever you talk about interpreting Revelation, and that comes into play. All right. Next can be perspective versus actual conflict. So here's an example. The events regarding Judas' death in Matthew and then retold in Acts are seemingly contradictory. In Matthew 27, verses 5 through 8, it says that the priests bought the field. It says that the priests bought the field. I'll turn there and read that. Matthew 27, 5 through 8. It says that they consulted together and bought the field, potter's field, to bury strangers in it, right? And then therefore it's been called the field of blood to this day. And then also in Matthew 27, 5 through 8, it says that Judas hung himself, and that's how he died. But then in Acts 1, verses 18 through 19, it tells us something a little bit different. It says that Judas bought the field. It says that Judas bought the field, and not only that, but he fell headlong and kind of burst a little. Not a little, that doesn't make... You get what I'm saying. And so kind of how do we reconcile this, right? Well, obviously these are two different accounts written by two different people, and I think that is kind of the answer here, right? Additional details are not contradictory details. When we're told that he hung himself and he fell headlong and burst open, are those two things impossible to happen at the same time? No. You can hang yourself, and then the rope can break, and you can fall, right? Or whatever, the tree can break. So, just because it's additional details does not mean that they contradict each other. Does that make sense? And then regarding the field, I think that this reflects the purpose of the writers, and kind of a difference in perspective. So, for an example, if I give some money to my friend and I say, "Hey, go buy me the shirt I saw at Walmart. I liked it," and then they go and do it and buy me the shirt, someone who watched that scenario could say, "Okay, Luke bought that shirt because it was my money. I gave it to my friend." But they could also say, "Hey, my friend went and bought that shirt because he actually did the purchasing," right? It was Judas's money that he threw back to the priests. But the priests actually did the purchasing. So that's not contradictory information. That's just a difference in our frame of reference. And so, again, not contradictory. The Bible's written by people, so we need to give them the same grace that we use when we talk on a daily basis. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. Well, you can't, yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying. You can't talk to people who don't even want to have a conversation with you, right? But like, and kind of the whole point of the class and as a whole, right, is to show there are areas in which even if someone does kind of shut you down, you can still, like, they're not shutting you down, they're shutting off themselves. So like, you can still talk to that person, and as long as they're willing to still engage in conversation, you have a foot in the door. So yeah, but like, you can't convince people to have an open mind if they're not willing to have one. So, but yeah, good point. The next category, kind of wrapping up pretty quickly, are translation or copying errors. So I debated whether or not to include this example because this will come up in another class, but Mark 16 is highly debated among scholars, if whether or not that's supposed to be important or not, whatever. But most early manuscripts don't include verses 9 through 20. And so that's a big point of debate. Like, okay, well, that's weird. Why don't they just have the whole ending of a chapter? So a lot of times people will say, oh, well, that's a huge contradiction, right? That's several verses. What do you do with that? If you actually examine kind of the documents themselves, you kind of see, okay, well, that's not really that big of a deal. Now, what I mean by that, I'm not arguing that, like, I'm not saying give this one up. I'm just saying the problem that they're presenting is not that big of a problem. This is what I mean. Nothing substantial is lost. No doctrine is lost if the ending of Mark is gone. It's just not. You can, like, a lot of times, like, well, just Mark 16, 15 through 16 is a classic verse talking about baptism, and some people will get upset because, like, that if you say this, that verse goes away. Well, the concept of baptism is throughout the entire Bible. It doesn't hang on this one verse. There's other things that just aren't lost to it also. And also, 99% of manuscripts still contain it. Just the earliest ones don't. And also, that's not contained or confined to one region. Throughout the entire world, most manuscripts contain the ending of Mark. There's also grammatical abruptness. It ends with the word for, F-O-R, if you stop at verse 8. That makes no sense. So if I'm just saying, yeah, so I went to the store for, and I don't say anything, right? That doesn't make any sense. Your ears are waiting to hear the conclusion. And also, for many manuscripts, there's a blank page left after verse 8 that are not found in other passages. There's a couple reasoning, there's a few theories as to why that is, but one of the main ones, or very convincing ones to me, is they knew that there was an ending that they didn't have. And that they left space. If they got it, they could put it in there. They knew it was around. But anyway. And then there's numbers and genealogies. 1 Kings 4:26 says that Solomon had 40,000 stalls. 2 Chronicles 9:25 says he has 4,000. So what do you do with that? I think it's probably closer to 4,000 because, like, roughly 3,000 horses could fit in one stall, or you know what I'm trying to say. The math works out better for this. But that's a separate debate. The words are like, they are so close. For 40,000 and 4,000, they are so close. If you touch it, you could think it's the other one, right? So that's just the nature of the manuscripts being kind of flawed, right? Paper is flawed. So it's not really, and again, this is not substantive. This doesn't change any doctrine. It's just a difference in how many stalls he had. But, right, that doesn't change scholars from saying, okay, the Bible is historical, even if the numbers are a little confusing. So these are some just general principles for problem solving. Look at the context. Evaluate whether this is meaningless or if it actually is of substance. Most of the time it's not. Consider the viewpoint and the purpose. And additional information is not contradictory information. Did you have a... All right. On that note, I just want to say, I know we're over time, but you got me riled up now. I want to go on a little rant. I understand that this is confusing to a large degree, and that most people haven't heard this kind of stuff, as you were saying. But there are people in this room. There are people like downstairs. Kids are going to school every day, being told what they believe is wrong, being told that it's stupid to believe what they believe. It's not, and that's why I'm teaching this class. We need to be able to talk about this in an intelligent way, because it is intelligent to believe in God and to believe the Bible and to believe in Jesus. But we just need to know why we believe what we believe. And so, yeah, thank you. Anyway, I'll close this out in prayer. I know we're over time, but thank you for your attention. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day that you've blessed us with, and thank you for this opportunity that we have to come together and study your word and study your nature and study how to defend you. Not that you need any defense, but that the hearts of those with pure faith sometimes need defending against those who question it. Dear God, we pray that we will be faithful to you in every aspect of our lives, and that our lives will be reflections of your goodness towards us and your holiness.